Have you ever poured your soul into something, believed in its mission with every fiber of your being, only to discover that the very people entrusted to protect it were planning to tear it down from the inside? What do you do when the place you called home, the work that defined you, becomes a battleground for its own survival? My name is Jasmine Calloway. For 20 years, the Harborview Center wasn't just my workplace. It was my calling. As head social worker, I dedicated my career to fighting for the most vulnerable in our community. The families teetering on the edge, the kids lost in the cracks of the system, the individuals battling homelessness and despair. My team, they were warriors of compassion, showing up every day with open hearts, trying to piece together lives that society had fractured. We weren't miracle workers, but we listened, we advocated, we cared. And for a long time I believed that was enough, that our dedication was valued. It started subtly, as these things often do. A shift in the air, a change in tone. I remember one evening, working late, the usual hum of the fluorescent lights my only companion. Arthur Sterling, our executive director, was in his office, his door just slightly ajar. I wasn't trying to listen, but his voice, usually so measured, carried a certain decisiveness. He was on the phone with a board member, I think. And I heard phrases like realigning priorities, optimal fiscal impact. Then, clear as a bell, the social work division, significant overhead, may not align with our new streamlined vision. My stomach clenched. Streamlined? What did that mean for the people who depended on us? For my team, who were already stretched to their limits? That unease began to grow in the weeks that followed. More closed-door meetings between Arthur and Brenda Wallace, our head of HR and development. Brenda was a master of corporate euphemisms, all synergy and best practices, but her eyes rarely met yours when she was delivering news you didn't want to hear. They started requesting an endless stream of reports, caseload breakdowns, success metrics, attempts to quantify the unquantifiable work of mending human lives. It felt cold, as if we were numbers on a spreadsheet, not a lifeline for a community. I recall one particularly grueling week. We'd been working around the clock with a young mother, barely more than a child herself, who'd escaped an abusive home with her 2 toddlers. My team, especially a dedicated young social worker named David Chan, had performed miracles to find them safe emergency shelter, to connect them with counseling, to simply show them that someone cared. We were all running on fumes emotionally and physically, but there was that quiet hum of satisfaction, that profound sense of having made a real difference. I mentioned some of the challenges to Arthur in a brief hallway exchange, hoping for a word of encouragement, some acknowledgement of the team's Herculean efforts. He just offered a tight, professional smile. "Efficiency is key, Jasmine," he said. "We need to see clear, measurable outcomes." Outcomes, as if a child's safety, a mother's hope, could be neatly graphed and presented in a quarterly report. The chasm between the human reality of our daily work and the sterile, corporate language coming from the top was widening, and a sense of dread began to settle in my heart. The Safe Haven Youth Program. That was a program I had poured my heart and soul into. I'd designed it years ago, from scratch, to provide intensive, wraparound support for at-risk teenagers, kids who were slipping through every other safety net. We offered them counseling, tutoring, life skills, and most importantly, a consistent, safe space where they felt seen and valued. And it was working. We were witnessing incredible transformations. We had a major funding partner, a prestigious philanthropic foundation, who believed deeply in the program. Their support was crucial, and our annual renewal meeting was just around the corner. I'd spent weeks meticulously preparing our presentation, compiling the data, the success stories, the evidence of our impact. Then, just 3 days before that vital meeting, an email landed in my inbox. Subject: Urgent Budget Reallocation. From Brenda Wallace. My blood ran cold. The email, couched in polite, utterly impersonal language, informed me that, due to unforeseen budgetary constraints and a strategic refocusing of resources, the operating budget for Safe Haven was being slashed by 50%. Effective immediately. 50%. It was a death blow. And as if that wasn't enough, my access to the program's detailed financial reporting system, the very data I needed for the funder meeting, was suddenly inexplicably restricted. For administrative streamlining. The IT ticket read. I tried to reach Arthur. His assistant informed me he was in back-to-back strategic planning sessions all day. Of course. Late that afternoon, a terse email from him finally arrived. Jasmine, it read. I understand this news may be challenging. However, these are difficult but necessary decisions for the long-term sustainability of the Harborview Center. I have full confidence in your ability to adapt and find creative solutions. Creative solutions? With half the funding and no access to my own program's data? The dismissiveness was a slap in the face. The next morning, Brenda summoned me for a brief chat. She sat behind her large, imposing desk, the picture of corporate composure. I laid out my concerns calmly but firmly. I explained how these cuts would not just cripple the program, but betray the trust of the vulnerable youth we served, and how it would undoubtedly jeopardize our relationship with our funders. She listened, nodding occasionally, a small, practiced smile playing on her lips. When I finished, she leaned forward, her voice soft, almost pitying. Jasmine, she said, we truly do appreciate your passion. But sometimes, we have to be pragmatic. You're fortunate, that the Harborview Center is still willing to indulge some of your more idealistic approaches. Indulge. Idealistic. All those years of experience, the evidence-based practices, the lives demonstrably changed, all dismissed as some naive idealistic indulgence. That was the moment. Something inside me, something that had been slowly eroding, just broke. Not with a bang but with a quiet, cold snap. I looked at Brenda, at her perfectly styled hair, her carefully neutral expression, and I nodded. I even managed a small, polite smile. Thank you for your time, Brenda, I said. And in that sterile office, in that moment of profound disillusionment, a decision crystallized. I'd recently been approached by a highly respected international NGO, a leader in developing innovative social work models. They'd offered me a senior advisory role, a chance to make an impact on a global scale. I hadn't seriously considered it before. Harborview was my home, my mission. But now it felt like a lifeline. But I wasn't just going to take the lifeline and disappear. Oh no. If they thought I was just an idealistic social worker they could sideline and silence, they were about to discover how wrong they were. This was no longer just about me or my career. This was about the very soul of what the Harborview Center was supposed to represent. That weekend was a whirlwind of quiet fury and meticulous preparation. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. I replayed every conversation, analyzed every document, considered every possible angle. This wasn't about personal revenge. It was about institutional accountability. It was about ensuring that the true mission of Harborview, the one I had dedicated my life to, wasn't sacrificed on the altar of someone's ambition or a dangerously flawed understanding of efficiency. Monday morning arrived. I took a deep, steadying breath before I clicked send. The email was addressed to Arthur Sterling with Brenda Wallace CC'd. Subject: Resignation, Jasmine Calloway. Attached was my formal letter of resignation, but that was merely the opening salvo. I had also attached a meticulously compiled document, a document I titled, An Independent Impact Assessment, the detrimental effects of recent budgetary reallocations on critical community programs and vulnerable populations served by the Harborview Center. It was a polite, professional, and utterly damning account of what their proposed cuts to Safe Haven and other quiet erosions of services I'd observed would mean in stark human terms. I laid out the statistics, the supporting research, the potential long-term societal costs. No histrionics, just cold, hard, devastating facts. And the CC line, that was where the real message lay. It wasn't just Arthur and Brenda. I included the personal email addresses of every single member of the Harborview Center's board of directors. I added the program officer and the director of grants from the foundation that funded Safe Haven. And for good measure, I included a couple of highly respected local journalists who specialized in social justice issues, individuals I'd built trusted relationships with over 2 decades, people I knew would grasp the gravity of the situation instantly. In the report, I didn't just talk about programs, I talked about people. The young mother my team had pulled back from the brink, the teenager who had found a path away from gang violence through the Safe Haven program, The elderly gentleman we'd helped secure stable housing after he'd spent months on the unforgiving streets. I wrote about how my team, day in and day out, served as the last line of defense, the quiet listeners, the tireless advocates for those society had forgotten. I didn't need to resort to inflammatory language. The unvarnished truth laid bare was indictment enough. Within the hour, the first tremors began. An email from the program officer at the Safe Haven Foundation, a curt reply all to my resignation. Ms. Calloway, thank you for bringing this critical information to our attention. We are deeply concerned by the contents of your report, and will be in touch shortly to discuss the future of our partnership with the Harborview Center. My phone started buzzing. First, a confused, then increasingly agitated, call from one of the board members. Then another. Arthur, I heard later, was seen pacing his office, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning panic. Brenda Wallace, usually so impeccably composed, began sending out a flurry of increasingly frantic internal Slack messages, urging staff to maintain a positive outlook and work together through challenges. They rang hollow, even to those who hadn't yet seen my report. Later that afternoon, Arthur finally called me. His voice, usually so smooth and self-assured, was strained, almost pleading. Jasmine, he began, I think there's been a serious misunderstanding. This isn't how we wanted things to play out. We can certainly discuss this. We can find a solution. A way forward that works for everyone. I let him talk. I listened to the fumbling excuses, the deflections, the transparent attempts to smooth things over. And when he finally paused, clearly expecting me to engage, to negotiate, I kept my voice calm, steady, devoid of the anger that simmered beneath the surface. Arthur, I said, you can't mend a broken trust with empty promises. You chose to prioritize spreadsheets over people. And now those people, and the people who care deeply about them, are going to have their say. I could almost hear the sharp intake of his breath on the other end of the line. Then a stunned silence. He hung up. I also composed a very brief, very polite email to Linda Sterling, Arthur's wife. I'd met her a few times at center fundraisers. She always seemed genuinely interested in our community work. My email simply said, Dear Linda, I felt it was important for you to be aware of certain decisions being made at the Harborview Center that are deeply impacting the community we both care about. I've attached a report for your information. Just a small seed of truth, planted where it might perhaps find fertile ground. The ripples had begun to spread. I knew, of course, that the resignation and the impact report were just the initial volleys. If Arthur and Brenda believed they could simply weather this storm, issue a few placating statements, and then quietly carry on as before, they were sorely mistaken. I had one more card to play, a card that was far more personal, far more damning. David Chun, that bright, dedicated young social worker on my team, was not only passionate about his work, he was also incredibly observant and possessed a quiet technical savvy. A few months prior, during a routine server migration, he had accidentally stumbled upon a misconfigured shared folder. It wasn't anything he was actively looking for, just a random system glitch. But what he found inside, it had chilled him to the bone. He'd come to me, his voice hushed with disbelief, and shared what he'd discovered. It was a series of documents, emails, and spreadsheets, all meticulously organized under a folder titled Project Streamline. Project Streamline. It sounded so innocuous, didn't it? So efficient. So corporate. But the contents were anything but. It was a meticulously detailed, cold-blooded plan to systematically restructure. Their preferred euphemism for dismantle key parts of the social work division. There were lists of employees, my valued team members, categorized with chillingly detached labels. Low performer, prone to emotional responses, resistant to change management, high cost, low tangible ROI. My name, Jasmine Calloway, was at the top of one particularly detailed list, next to the annotation. Transition to unpaid advisory role or phase out. Target. End of current fiscal year. Rationale. Overly invested in legacy programs, resistant to new efficiency models, potential for internal dissent. They even had a candidate pipeline for my replacement, someone they deemed more aligned with strategic management objectives. There were email exchanges between Arthur and Brenda, discussing specific strategies to manage out certain individuals, to create paper trails of supposed poor performance, to offer voluntary separation packages that were clearly designed to be anything but voluntary. The most sickening discovery, the one that truly exposed the rot at the core, was a memo from Arthur to Brenda regarding staff morale and program direction. He had written, and I will never forget these words as long as I live, "We need less bleeding heart advocacy from within our ranks and more unwavering alignment with strategic fiscal objectives." Some of these social workers seem to believe they're running a grassroots charity, not a vital division of a multi-million-dollar organization. Brenda's reply was equally chilling in its detached professionalism. Agreed. Project Streamline Implementation Plan attached for your review. Recommend a phased approach to minimize operational disruption and mitigate the potential for organized dissent. Organized dissent. That's how they viewed our passionate dedication to our clients. Our tireless fight for adequate resources. David, with a heavy heart but a clear conscience, had made a secure encrypted copy of everything before the folder access was, just as mysteriously as it had appeared, rectified a few days later. He had given it to me, his eyes troubled, saying, "Jasmine, I don't know what to do with this, but you need to see it. This is profoundly wrong." He was right. It was more than wrong. It was a betrayal of every principle the Harborview Center was supposed to represent. So that evening, after Arthur's panicked, self-serving phone call, I took that encrypted USB drive. I drafted 3 more emails, each one carefully worded. One was addressed to the chair of the board of directors, with the subject line, "Urgent and confidential. Critical information regarding internal operations, personnel management, and ethical conduct at the Harborview Center." Another went to the lead attorney for the philanthropic foundation that funded Safe Haven, a man known for his meticulous attention to detail and his zero tolerance for unethical practices in the nonprofit sector. And a third, with a slightly different, more personal and concerned note, to Linda Sterling. I attached the entire Project Streamline dossier, every damning email, every callous spreadsheet, every manipulative memo, to each of those emails. Then, with a steady hand, I hit send. I sat back in my chair, a strange, almost surreal calm washing over me. The unvarnished, ugly truth was out there now, irrefutable and undeniable. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. A text message from David. Just one word. Boom. The Harborview Center, or at least the version of it that had been secretly and cynically managed by Arthur Sterling and Brenda Wallace, was about to be unmasked. The fallout was swift. And it was brutal. The very next morning, the philanthropic foundation that was the primary funder for our Safe Haven program, the one whose partnership was so critical to our work with at-risk youth, issued a public statement. They weren't just deeply concerned anymore. They announced an immediate and indefinite suspension of all funding to the Harborview Center, pending a full and independent investigation into serious allegations of mismanagement, unethical personnel practices, and a fundamental departure from the stated mission of the organization. They specifically mentioned their profound disappointment regarding the treatment of long-standing, highly respected and effective program leaders. A clear, unequivocal nod to me and the work we had done. My photograph, an old one from a Harborview newsletter, even appeared in one of the online articles that quickly picked up their statement. Suddenly, my phone, which had been buzzing incessantly with calls from concerned and now increasingly alarmed board members, started ringing with a very different kind of call. Offers. Heads of other nonprofit organizations, directors of citywide social initiatives, even the international NGO that had approached me weeks earlier, all reaching out. The CEO of that NGO called me personally. "Jasmine," he said, his voice a mixture of warmth and I think a little amusement. "I've been reading about what's happening over at Harborview. It seems you've stirred up quite the hornet's nest. When you're ready to talk seriously about making a global impact with your expertise, my offer still stands. And frankly, Jasmine, after witnessing this, I think the world needs your kind of principled courage now more than ever." Meanwhile, back at the Harborview Center, it was by all accounts complete and utter chaos. I heard through the grapevine David, bless his brave heart, kept me updated with discreet texts, that there were emergency board meetings happening almost constantly, some reportedly lasting late into the night. The local news picked up the story, a small piece at first, then a larger, more detailed one as more information from the Project Streamline documents began to leak, likely from a disgruntled board member or perhaps another brave internal whistleblower who finally felt empowered to speak out. Respected community leaders, pastors, and advocates started calling publicly for Arthur's immediate resignation. Parents and youth from the Safe Haven program, hearing about the devastating budget cuts and my forced departure, organized a small, dignified but deeply moving protest outside the center, holding handmade signs that read, "Save Safe Haven," and "We Stand with Jasmine." Their voices, though small, were powerful. And then there was Linda Sterling. I don't know the exact details of the conversations that transpired in the Sterling household after she received the Project Streamline files. But a few days later, a very interesting anonymous package arrived at the office of the board chair. It contained, I was later told by a trusted source, copies of Arthur Sterling's personal expense reports from the last 2 years, meticulously detailing a pattern of lavish spending on client development and networking dinners at the city's most expensive restaurants, first-class air travel for essential conferences that seemed to bear a remarkable resemblance to luxury vacations, and even some highly questionable consulting fees paid to a shell company owned by a close personal friend of Arthur's. All funded, of course, by the Harborview Center's operational budget, the very same budget that apparently couldn't afford to keep the Safe Haven program fully functional or pay its dedicated social workers a decent wage. Linda, it turned out, possessed a quiet strength and an unshakable moral compass of her own. Arthur's carefully constructed public facade of the dedicated, selfless community leader was crumbling, brick by painful brick. The authentic voice of the community, amplified by the undeniable truth, was finally being heard. And the fall, for those who had betrayed that trust, was just beginning. A week after I sent that final damning email, the one containing the Project Streamline dossier, I received a formal invitation. Not from Arthur Sterling, of course. He had become conspicuously silent, reportedly taking an extended personal leave. Brenda Wallace, too, had vanished from public view. The invitation was from Councilman Roberts, a long-standing and generally respected member of the Harborview Center's board of directors, someone known for his pragmatic approach but also, I believed, for a genuine, if sometimes muted, concern for the community. He requested a private meeting. I agreed cautiously. We met in a neutral location, a small quiet coffee shop tucked away downtown, far from the charged atmosphere of Harborview. Councilman Roberts looked tired, the strain of the past week etched on his face. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "Jasmine," he said, his voice heavy with a sincerity I hadn't expected, "on behalf of the board of directors, or at least those of us who are profoundly appalled and ashamed by what has come to light in the past 7 days, I want to offer our sincerest and unreserved apologies. We failed. We failed in our oversight, we failed in our duty, and we allowed a culture to develop within Harborview that was antithetical to every principle this organization was founded upon." He paused, then looked me directly in the eyes, a gesture of respect I hadn't received from Harborview leadership in a very long time. "The damage is significant, Jasmine. To our reputation, to our funding streams, to staff morale, and most importantly, to the sacred trust of the community we are meant to serve. We need to fix this. And frankly, Jasmine, after much deliberation, a significant portion of the board believes that you are the only one who can lead that effort." He then laid out a proposal. They wanted me to come back to the Harborview Center, not just as head social worker, the role I had held for 2 decades, but in a newly created, significantly empowered position, Chief Program Officer, with a direct seat on the senior leadership team, complete oversight of all community-facing programs, and substantial, direct input into all budgetary and strategic planning decisions. It was a remarkable offer, a complete and almost unbelievable turnaround from the dismissal notice I had essentially received just weeks before. I listened patiently, without interruption, letting the weight of his words and the implications of his offer settle. When he was finished, I took a slow, deliberate sip of my now lukewarm coffee. I wasn't going to make this easy for them. This wasn't about a job for me anymore. It wasn't about personal vindication. This was about fundamental, systemic change. Councilman, I began, my voice calm but infused with a resolve I hadn't realized I possessed until that moment. I appreciate the offer, and I appreciate your candor. It means more than you know. But if I were to even consider returning to the Harborview Center, it would not be under the old terms, or even these new proposed ones alone. There would have to be conditions. Strict, non négociable conditions. His eyebrows rose slightly, a flicker of surprise, perhaps, but he nodded, his expression serious. Go on, Jasmine. We're listening. First, I said, my gaze unwavering. Arthur Sterling and Brenda Wallace must be terminated from their positions at the Harborview Center. Not allowed to resign quietly with a severance package. Terminated, with cause, based on the clear findings of an immediate and transparent internal investigation into their conduct, their mismanagement, and their ethical lapses. He winced almost imperceptibly but didn't argue. That is already in process. Understood. Second, I continued, a full independent forensic audit of the Harborview Center's finances and operational practices for the past 5 fiscal years must be commissioned immediately, conducted by a reputable external firm with no prior ties to the center. And the full unredacted report from that audit must be made public to the community and all stakeholders. Third, I stated, the Harborview Center through its board of directors must issue a formal, public and unequivocal apology. An apology to the dedicated staff for the toxic culture, the lack of support, and the unethical treatment they have endured. An apology to our community partners and our funders for the profound breach of trust. And most importantly, a heartfelt apology to the clients we serve, the vulnerable individuals and families who were put at risk by these catastrophic failures of leadership. Fourth, I pressed on, the operating budget for the Safe Haven Youth Program, and for all other critical frontline services that have been systematically starved of resources under the previous administration, must be fully restored to their necessary operational levels and, where appropriate, significantly enhanced. There must be clear, written guarantees for multi-year funding stability for these core programs. And fifth, and perhaps most crucially, I concluded, a permanent community oversight board must be established. This board will be comprised of representatives from our diverse client populations, dedicated frontline staff members, and respected, independent community leaders. It will have genuine legislated power to review program effectiveness, scrutinize budgetary decisions, and ensure ongoing accountability and transparency in all of Harborview's operations moving forward. I leaned back in my chair, letting my terms hang in the air between us. Those are my conditions. Councilman. All of them. If the board of directors is truly serious about rebuilding trust, about healing the wounds, and about authentically serving this community with integrity, then that is what it will take. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on his own untouched coffee cup, the weight of my demands clearly registering. Then he looked up and I saw not defeat, but a new, albeit weary, resolve in his eyes. Jasmine, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Those are significant, far-reaching demands. But having seen what I've seen in the past week, having read what I've read, they are undeniably fair. And they are absolutely necessary if Harborview is to have any future at all. He paused. I cannot speak for the entire board at this precise moment, but I will personally and forcefully champion every single one of these conditions. You have my word on that. We will need 1 week to convene to deliberate, and to give you a formal unified response. He stood up then and for the first time, extended his hand across the small table. Thank you for your courage, Jasmine, and for your unwavering clarity. The reckoning had truly begun, and the terms for Harborview's renewal, its very survival, were now firmly on the table. True to Councilman Roberts' word, and undoubtedly fueled by the intense public and internal pressure, things moved with uncharacteristic speed. The emergency board meetings continued, reportedly filled with heated debate, soul-searching, and a dawning, painful acceptance of the depth of the crisis. Exactly 1 week after our coffee shop meeting, I received a formal, written communication. The board of directors of the Harborview Center, by a unanimous vote, had agreed to accept all 5 of my conditions. Arthur Sterling and Brenda Wallace were officially terminated, effective immediately. The process for commissioning the independent audit was already underway. A press conference was being scheduled for later that week, where the board chair would issue the public apology I had demanded. And so, I returned to the Harborview Center. Felt surreal. Walking through those familiar glass doors, not as an employee who had been targeted and nearly discarded, but as someone entrusted with the monumental task of leading its revival, of rebuilding it from the ground up, based on principles of integrity and authentic service. There was so much damage to undo, so much broken trust to painstakingly mend. My first priority, even before tackling the programmatic and financial wreckage, was the staff. Many were shell-shocked, deeply demoralized by what they had endured, but also I sensed cautiously, fragilely hopeful. I met with them individually and in small groups. I didn't offer platitudes or easy answers. I listened. I acknowledged their pain, their anger, their frustration. I promised them transparency, a genuine voice in shaping the future, and an unwavering commitment to creating a workplace where they felt valued, respected, and safe. David Chun, whose quiet courage had been so instrumental, was one of the very first people I brought onto my new core leadership team. His integrity, his profound empathy, and his deep, intuitive understanding of our clients' most pressing needs were invaluable. Together, we began the daunting but essential work of reviewing every program, every budget line, every outdated and harmful policy. We re-engaged with our community partners, with our funders, not with excuses but with a clear, honest plan for a new Harborview, one built on a bedrock of authentic service, ethical leadership, and genuine, collaborative partnership. A few weeks into my new, expanded role, an anonymous email landed in my inbox. It was from an internal Harborview IP address, likely someone in the finance or IT department who, feeling the shift in culture, had finally felt safe enough to come forward. It contained meticulously detailed information, along with some irrefutably damning attachments, related to a small, off-the-books discretionary fund that Arthur Sterling had personally maintained for years. It was funded by small, unrecorded cash donations, the kind that often slip through the cracks. And he had used it for, well, let's just say a variety of non-mission-related personal expenses. More fuel for the independent audit. More stark evidence of the pervasive rot we were painstakingly clearing out. We didn't just restore the Safe Haven Youth Program. We expanded it, guided by direct feedback from the youth themselves, ensuring their voices were central to its redesign. We launched new innovative initiatives, addressing emerging and often overlooked needs within the community. Needs that had been systematically ignored for far too long. We brought client representatives onto our program planning committees, ensuring their lived experiences shaped our strategies. We worked diligently to ensure the newly formed Community Oversight Board wasn't just a token gesture, a symbolic nod to accountability, but a real empowered force for change, with genuine authority to scrutinize our work and hold us to the highest standards. It wasn't easy. There were days filled with profound frustration, with unexpected setbacks, with the sheer weight of trying to undo years of mismanagement and rebuild a deeply broken organizational culture. It takes time, it takes relentless patience, and it takes an unwavering commitment to doing the right thing every single day, even when it's exhausting, even when it's unpopular with those resistant to change. I heard through the grapevine that Arthur Sterling had quietly moved out of state, his once promising career in the nonprofit sector effectively over, a quiet footnote to a chapter of betrayal. Brenda Wallace, I was told, was actively exploring new and exciting opportunities, the universally understood euphemism for struggling to find anyone willing to hire her in a field where reputation and trust are paramount. I didn't take any particular pleasure in their personal downfall, not really. My focus, my energy, my entire being was consumed with building something better, something stronger. Something that truly lived up to the promise inherent in the name the Harborview Center. Sometimes, late at night, when the building is finally quiet again, the frantic energy of the day subsided, I walked through the empty halls. I paused by the door of what used to be Arthur's office, now a collaborative workspace for our frontline teams. I think about how close we came to losing it all. How easily a noble mission can be corrupted by personal ambition and moral indifference. But then I think about my incredible team, about David's unwavering integrity, about the bright, resilient kids in the Safe Haven program finding their footing, about the countless families who rely on us, who trust us with their most vulnerable moments. And I know, with a certainty that settles deep in my bones, that this fight, this arduous, often thankless work of rebuilding, it's all worth it. The seeds of change, planted in difficult soil, are beginning to take root. And our mission, our unwavering, sacred mission to serve, to uplift, to empower, that continues. That, I now know, will always continue. My journey at the Harborview Center, this unexpected, tumultuous, and ultimately transformative chapter of my life, it wasn't just about exposing wrongdoing or reclaiming a position of leadership. It was a profound and deeply personal lesson in the incredible resilience of community, the undeniable power of unvarnished truth, and the quiet, unwavering strength that can be discovered within oneself when you stand firm on your most deeply held principles. It taught me, more clearly than 2 decades of professional experience ever could, that true leadership isn't about titles or authority or control. It's about selfless service, unshakable integrity, and the unwavering courage to speak up, to fight for those whose voices are too often silenced or ignored. The vital work of social justice, of truly caring for one another, it's never truly finished. It's a constant effort, a daily recommitment to our shared humanity, to the belief that a better, more compassionate world is always possible. If my story, this experience of seeing deeply cherished values betrayed by those in power, and then finding the strength to fight for their restoration, resonates with you in some way, if you've ever had to stand up for what's right in your own workplace, your own community, or your own life, I would be truly honored if you'd share your thoughts or your own experiences in the comments section below. I do read every single one. And I believe with all my heart that there's profound strength and healing in knowing that we are not alone in these often difficult struggles. If you found something in this journey that connected with your own, please consider subscribing to TK Revenge Story. We share more stories here every week, stories of resilience, stories of finding justice in the most unexpected of ways, and stories that illuminate the quiet, often underestimated, power that resides within each of us. And if you feel moved to support our channel, and the work we do in bringing these important, often unheard stories to light, the super thanks button is always available. Every bit of support, no matter how small, helps us continue this mission, helps us keep these vital conversations going. Sometimes, giving back even in these small ways is an integral part of our own healing too. Thank you for listening. Thank you for allowing me to share this part of my life, this part of my heart with you. Please remember always, your voice matters, your principles matter, and the fight for a more just, a more equitable, and a more compassionate world is a fight worth waging every single day.